service sets the Westin Galleria apart from the others. The Westin Galleria, where nothing unimportant ever happens. Call the Director of Catering at 960-8100 to arrange your personal consultation.
Good afternoon, I'm Sheila Rushlow, and this is KTRH, and today is a day to talk with a couple of people who are running for office, for national office. Later on this afternoon, our guest will be David Bergland. He is the Libertarian Party candidate for president. And with us now by telephone, Angela Davis. She is the vice presidential candidate, her running mate, presidential candidate Gus Hall, for the Communist Party USA. Our telephone number here, and we'll get to your calls just a little bit later on, is 526-4984. And a long-distance line, 1-800-392-6167. Good afternoon, Angela Davis, and thank you for being with us.
Good afternoon.
I'd like to start off with talking a little bit about your history, because I think a lot of people think of you as a 60s radical and don't know much else about your life. When and why did you become a communist?
I joined the Communist Party in 1968 during a period when the struggle for black liberation was particularly intense. I lived in Los Angeles at the time and was very impressed by the activities and the leadership given to the movement in general by members of the Communist Party.
Some of the people that were also active in that era have gone on to manufacture men's clothing, get born again, write cookbooks. What do you think of them now? Are you in touch with any of these people?
Not really, and I think that it is strange that so much publicity has been showered on those who have moved away from the movement, while very little publicity has been accorded those who have continued to participate in the kinds of demonstrations and the campaigns that were characteristic of that period. And of course, I've been active continuously since I was released from jail in 1972. I've been active in an organization that's called the National Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression. And many people who were active during that era are still involved in the alliance, as well as others, as well as younger people, of course. And we do find it difficult sometimes to get the kind of publicity which we need in order to develop campaigns around political prisoners and the other things that we do.
In one of the pieces of information I have, it's actually a biographical sketch of your running mate, Gus Hall.
Yes.
It says, today, more than ever, there is a new keen interest in hearing what the Communist Party has to say. Is there really? I certainly haven't gotten that impression.
Well, I have been speaking and participating in mass events continuously for, I would say, since 1969, since I was fired from my job at UCLA. That's about 15 years. And I've discovered that during this period, there is indeed a greater interest, a greater receptivity to the ideas that the Communist Party is putting forth, a greater desire to seek radical solutions. And the anti-communism, of course, which is very strong, particularly in the high levels of government and encouraged by such figures as Ronald Reagan. However, that anti-communism seems to have had much less of an impact among ordinary people than in previous years.
What does the Communist Party of the USA stand for?
We stand for an end to the exploitation of all workers. We are for an end to racism. We believe that the threat of a nuclear holocaust should not hover over the world as it does today. And of course, we believe that ultimately we need a socialist society which is based on the needs and the aspirations of all the people who live in that society, rather than being based on the profit drive of the corporations who control the economy.
Is there a functioning model of the kind of nation you wish this country were right now in the world anywhere? Has there ever been?
Well, of course, there are many socialist countries.
But any that you think are doing it right? There are many different kinds of socialism.
Let me put it this way. every single socialist country, I think, has gone much further than the U.S. has than this country has been able to go in solving problems like unemployment, sexism, racism, etc. The process of building socialism is precisely that. It's a process. It does not occur overnight. So that there's no particular country that one could point to as having achieved the ultimate aims, as having solved all problems. And of course, I think we have to recognize that each country must build socialism in accordance with its own traditions, in accordance with its own history. And of course, each may learn from others. We may learn from the Soviet Union, from Cuba, from the German Democratic Republic, etc. But we do not have the same history as those countries. We do not have the same traditions. We do not have the same cultures. So that while there are many similarities that would emerge, it would not be possible simply to take a blueprint from either one of those countries and impose that blueprint on this country.
All right, but when you say communist, I think most Americans tend to think of the Soviet model before they do any other. Let's talk about that a little bit. There seems to be, and from all the reports of the people who have worked so hard to get out of that country, as they are not allowed free access, that there seems to be a tremendous repression of human rights. I don't doubt that there's that repression there. Do you?
Well, let me say this. It's very interesting, isn't it, that we hear about the people who are trying to get out. But in the established news media of this country, we very seldom hear anything about the millions and millions of people who are building socialism inside the Soviet Union. And unfortunately, most people in this country must depend on the news media reports, having not been able to get a first-hand experience in the Soviet Union. I've been to the Soviet Union several times, and I'm very impressed by what I see. I don't see people running to try to get out of the country. As a matter of fact, I think that with the fact that there's no unemployment in the Soviet Union compared to the 10 million unemployed in this country, given the fact that people in the Soviet Union paid no more than 5% of their income for rent. And of course, many people are being evicted today as a result of the assault on working people in general. Free child care, all kinds of things that we are struggling for in this country, people have achieved in the Soviet Union. Now, this isn't to say that there aren't those who aren't opposed to the system of socialism. Of course, they are.
But okay, what you're saying is because so many people choose to live there and want to live there, that means they must like it.
I can't understand why people would prefer to live in a society in which they might not be able to find jobs, in which they have to spend half of their money on shelter, in which they have to pay for knowledge, in which they have to pay for health care, where...
Will you live here? Isn't this out of your preference?
I'm struggling to build a socialist United States of America, precisely. And many other people are also. Many people who may not consider themselves communists. It's not necessary to be a member of the Communist Party to recognize that some real changes have to happen in this country, that it's wrong for people to be, whole families to be evicted from their homes because plants have been shut down and they no longer have the money to pay rent. It's wrong for people to be turned away from hospitals because they cannot afford to have an operation that may mean the difference between their life and their death. I know that many people in this country want to move in the direction of building a society in which those things are not possible, in which there is free health care, free education, free child care, and jobs for all.
Well, security in terms of the material goods of life is, of course, very important, but what about other sorts of freedoms, like the freedom to speech and the freedom to worship and all those things that we Americans do hold so near and dear? Like your right to get on a talk show and my right to get on a talk show and say what we damn well please.
And there are people who, I think that we should recognize that people do have freedom of speech. in the Soviet Union. Unfortunately, as I said before, the information that most people receive in this country comes from a source that's often biased.
So you don't believe in the Gulag Archipelago and that sort of stuff?
Let me say that there are some people who are indeed denied the right to freedom of speech. If you want to put it that way, I would put it in different terms. Let me again, because I think we really ought to focus on what's happening in this country. Let me say that there are certain things that I believe people ought not be able to advocate in this country. It really ought to be a crime to advocate racism. And many of the organizations that I'm working with today are moving in the direction of attempting to outlaw the Ku Klux Klan. Let me say that black people in this country, if you inform black people that a group of white people should have the right to speak freely about organizing a movement to bring slavery back into existence in this country, to re-enslave all black people. I think that those black people would argue that those people should not have the right to advocate the reinstitution of slavery. In the Soviet Union, socialism has gone one step beyond capitalism historically, so that those who are advocating returning to a period of capitalism are advocating what would be tantamount to returning to slavery. And I think that one has to understand things within that kind of historical perspective.
All right. You think that the Klan should not be allowed? We're having a Klan march, as a matter of fact, here in Houston on Saturday. The law says we must. Do you think that should not be allowed?
I think that definitely should not be allowed. The historical...
Okay, but if we shut up the Klan, what's to stop us from shutting up you?
It never works that way. This is the argument that people often give, but it never works that way. During periods when the Ku Klux Klan, for example, has been outlawed, and that was, of course, during the era of radical Reconstruction during the last century, the progressive forces were able to achieve their greatest accomplishments. That was the period in which the South really was beginning to rise based on an alliance between black and white working people. So it just doesn't work that way. And the Ku Klux Klan not only advocates genocide, but it carries out actions of terrorism and
I agree.
death. And an organization that is for the kind of racism and anti-Semitism represented by the Klan, the violent racism and anti-Semitism, should have no place in a democratic society. And of course, this is a period during which we've read a lot in the papers about the 40th anniversary of D-Day in Europe. In many European countries, precisely because of the experience that they had during the occupation of the Nazi troops. In France, for example, there are laws prohibiting the organization of any Nazi organizations. In West Germany, there are laws prohibiting the re-emergence of the Nazi Party because they have experienced firsthand what those kinds of organizations are capable of accomplishing. And they see that really has nothing to do with freedom. If one talks about freedom of speech in that respect, it's only in a very formalistic way, because to give someone the freedom to advocate and carry out not only acts which will lead to the unfreedom of others, but acts which may lead to the very death of other people is absolutely contradictory to any notion of freedom.
The Communist Party of the United States, I know there are other parties around, the Labor Party, the Socialist Workers' Party. Are you all together on these issues, or does your party stand separate from them?
Well, there are similarities and there are differences, and let me say that in the campaign that the Communist Party is waging now in connection with the presidential elections, we see ourselves as part of a larger movement to guarantee the defeat of Reagan, a movement which embraces other third progressive political parties, but a movement which embraces also a movement which embraces the labor movement and the black movement, a movement which involves those who have been so active in the campaign around Jesse Jackson. So we understand the absolute need to create a united movement that will prevent Reagan from being elected in November.
Well, speaking of Jesse Jackson, what do you think of the Rainbow Party?
Oh, I think that the campaign that Jesse Jackson has waged over the last month has really radicalized electoral politics. It is one of the most important developments in the area of electoral politics since perhaps the passage of the Voting Rights Act in 1965.
But he's working very much within the system. I mean, he's a Democrat. He is a preacher.
Yes, at the same time, of course, the work that he has been doing has been critical of many of the weaknesses of the Democratic Party. There are many people who work within the Democratic Party who are critical of its ties with the corporate structure, who are critical of its official stances in many areas. And Jesse Jackson, I think, has developed the kind of force that can put pressure on the Democratic Party to move in the direction of change.
In much of the literature, you speak about the workers, and I guess these days I'm getting a little confused as to who the workers are. Obviously, I work for a living and I work for somebody else, but I also take my money and I invest it in, I guess, corporate America. And I have an independent retirement account and all those sorts of things. Am I still a worker?
Oh, definitely, definitely. As long that the things that you say may be true, but do you actually control the economy in this country? Do you have direct lines to the executive suites of the auto industry, the steel industry, the electrical industry, the transportation?
Is there anywhere in the world where the working schmo has direct lines to that? Anywhere?
Well, I think what we have to talk about is the eradication eventually of that whole corporate structure and the recreation of an economic structure that allows precisely for the control by workers themselves. And what is most essential is that what people produce should not end up as profits in the coffers of the big capitalists, but rather...
But some of those profits end up in my bank account.
Yes, but suppose you were to be laid off tomorrow.
That'd be tough.
Exactly.
But I'd go out and find new work.
But suppose there were no work, as millions of people are experiencing now. Wouldn't you like to know that there was unemployment compensation regardless of how many months you had or had not worked? Unemployment compensation, as a matter of fact, for first-time job seekers. Wouldn't you like to know that that you might not lose your home as a result of losing a job?
Possibly, but I intend to spend much more of my life working than not working, and I'd also like to know while I'm working that I get to take home the money I've worked for instead of paying out massive amounts of it in taxes.
Precisely, and as a matter of fact, I think that this is one of the points that we're making in our campaign, that people who make under about $30,000 a year should not have to pay any taxes at all. As a matter of fact, the taxes should come primarily from the large corporations. But
the corporation's going to turn around and pass it off on to us in their prices.
But that should not be allowed to happen. There should be price controls as well. I know that you can make all of these comments, but we're talking about the attempt to restructure a whole system that would not permit the corporations to rake in the kinds of profits that they are permitted to rake in today. And particularly, of course, during the last several years under the Reagan administration, what we have experienced is an attempt to further redistribute the wealth in this country to the interest of the corporations and to the detriment of the masses of people in this country.
Our guest is Angela Davis. She is running as the vice presidential candidate on the ticket with Gus Hall for the Communist Party USA. This is KTRH, and our number is 526-4984. Long distance, 1-800-392-6167. If you'd like to ask questions, just give us a call.
Welcome to Captain John's. Come on in. Let me show you around. Our look is much the same as it was when Captain John's first opened in 1942. Sit at a table or at the bar for the freshest Gulf oysters, clam chowder, or seafood gumbo just chock full of good things. Oh, our happy hour also has 2-for-1 oysters. Now follow me for a real treat. Oh, watch your step now. Surprised? Right here, Captain John's created one of Houston's finest gourmet seafood restaurants. Our tradition lives on with the freshest East Coast seafoods. Oysters Rockefeller, fresh Maine lobster, grilled swordfish, snapper pontchartrain, and crab meat sauté. With our extensive wine list and service in the River Oaks Manor, all we want you to do is enjoy yourselves. By the way, Captain John serves continuously from 11 a.m. to 1 a.m., so we're perfect for a late lunch or dinner. Captain John's on West Gray near the River Oaks Center. And now your table. This way, please.
If you buy drinking water at the grocery store or you pay the high cost of bottled drinking water, this message is for you.
Like a message in a bottle?
Huh?
A message in a bottle like, help, I'm lost at sea, save me.
Well, this is about saving. Bottled water is getting expensive, but a Culligan drinking water system gives you gallons and gallons of pure, great-tasting water at a fraction of the cost.
But no bottles.
No bottles. The Culligan drinking water system fits conveniently out of sight. It filters and purifies regular tap water, comes out of its own special faucet. You can even have it piped into your automatic ice cube maker.
Gee.
And it really saves you money. Why don't you call your Culligan man for help?
Hey, Culligan man.
Enjoy Culligan drinking water conveniently and for much less than bottled water.
Get the message?
Now until July 28th, when you rent your Culligan Aqua Clear drinking water system, they'll install it free. Start enjoying pure, clean, great-tasting water today. Call your Culligan man at 795-4575.
I'm Sheila Rushlow. This is KTRH, and our guest is Angela Davis. She is the vice presidential candidate for the Communist Party USA. The presidential candidate is Gus Hall. He is the general secretary of the Communist Party USA, probably the single person in this country most associated with communism, as he's been involved in it for many, many years. Our telephone number here is 526-4984. And from LaPorte, good afternoon. You're on KTRH.